Hello, this is David Wilkins again from ASALH. And Ms. Sherrill tells me that you all are continuing in your study of U.S. government, focused on the issues with the Articles of Confederation, which would lead to the drafting of the U.S. Constitution. And you're looking at Shay's Rebellion as one of the drivers behind that change in the form of our government. I want to comment on Shays briefly, but before I do that, I want to talk about an earlier revolution, or I should say rebellion, that took place about 100 years earlier in the colonies, Virginia in particular. This would have been the Bacon's Rebellion, which took place about 1676. Nathaniel Bacon was an Englishman who'd come to the colony seeking his fortune, and he was going to fulfill that plan by acquiring land. He ran into a hurdle in the form of the governor, Governor Berkeley, who was doling out land to his wealthy friends and trying to also at the same time keep peace with the local indigenous tribes who owned that land. Nathaniel Bacon then took it upon himself to form a group of poor whites and poor blacks, many of whom had been indentured servants, and proceeded to attack the Indians, the indigenous people, trying to steal their lands. This, of course, created a conflict with the governor and the government of Jamestown. Bacon then turned his fire toward the governor and the governor's forces. Ultimately, Bacon and his rebels would burn Jamestown to the ground, forcing the governor to flee. Regrettably for Bacon, he would die of dysentery before he could really strengthen his position and try to take over the colony. The English king will then send the governor back with forces, and they would resume control of Jamestown, and it would develop. But one of the key messages out of Bacon's rebellion was the recognition by the wealthy landowners that they needed a government that would protect their interests, protect their property, and most importantly, prevent a coming together, a combination of poor white and poor black that would pose a threat again to their power and to their wealth. They would resolve this problem by granting small grants of land to the whites, not the blacks, and then they would begin passing laws that would both prevent free and enslaved black people from owning land and from participating in the government. So let's quickly then move to your study of Daniel Shay and Shay's Rebellion, and I'll tell you how I think those are similar, and that the messages learned by the wealthy are also similar. So as you'll see in the video in a minute, Shay's is a Revolutionary War soldier returning from the Revolutionary War and wanting to again assume operating his small farm. He has not been paid by the states. You remember the states will be responsible to finance their soldiers sent to the revolution. There is no central government. The Articles of Incorporation just doesn't provide a taxing authority. That's one of the issues. So Shays returns and is in debt, and demands are being made on him that those debts be paid. This creates great friction among Shays and other small farmers. Ultimately, as you'll find, they will join together and they will try to shut down the local governments, the governments that are trying to collect on those debts. This, again, shows to the wealthy landowners who will be the delegates to the convention that will follow soon after this Shay's rebellion, that they need a stronger central government that will ensure they have the power to protect their wealth from rebellions such as Shay's. So these key messages that I think you see in both the Bacon's rebellion of 1676 and the Shay's rebellion of 1786 is that the wealthy landowners, the powerful who would also be the delegates to the Constitutional Convention, need a form of government that will protect their interest, and they will put that government in place through the mechanism of the US Constitution. So as you're studying both this episode and all of the other episodes, I hope you're asking yourself some tough questions about this democracy of ours. Really, when the drafters of the Declaration said all men are created equal, did they really mean that? We know that they did not mean that for men, women, and children of African descent. Did they also mean it for poor whites? I think when you ask that question and look at cases like both Bacon's rebellion and Shay's, you're going to get to an answer that will, I think, clarify for you, again, how important wealth and power and the protection of power. When you get to looking at the actual Constitution that will be produced in that convention, you will see that the powerful, particularly the slave holders, many of whom were delegates, will protect their interest in human property. The 3/5 clause we've talked about, the fugitive slave clause, the period of time that they would allow the African slave trade to continue. And there are other protections that you'll study. So as you're thinking about these issues, thinking about our democracy, and looking at instances like Shay's rebellion, I hope you're asking these tough questions about our democracy then and reflecting on our democracy today. Let's take a look at another of the Hip Hughes videos that explains this in some detail.
Hey guys, welcome to Hip Hughes History. It's so glad that you showed up for another episode of The Learnin'. In this episode, guys, we're going to briefly talk about the event called Shay's Rebellion, really a critical turning point in American history, so pay attention. We're not going to go 15 layers under the covers, but just kind of skim the surface, and certainly if you're writing a paper or you have a big presentation on Shay's Rebellion, this is the starting point, not the ending point. So we have to frame things out. It's 1786. We're in the last years of the Articles of Confederation, and you really need to know the major ideas behind the Articles of Confederation to understand Shay's Rebellion. So in class, I do this a lot. I'll just kind of grab a little piece of a paper here, and I'll remind you that the definition of federalism is when we take power and then we divide that power, and some of that power goes to the federal government and some goes to the state government, so we have this sort of balance. Under the Articles, we divide it a little bit differently. Rather than doing what's called dual federalism, or, kind of evenly split federalism, I'm going to just kind of go federalism is the division of power between the federal government and the states. So this is the federal government's power. And we certainly understand why it's like this if you're coming out of the tyranny of Great Britain. The federal government wasn't trusted. We did not want a strong federal government. And certainly if you watch the AOC lecture I've done, you'll learn that it's inflexible and there's no power to tax. There's no monetary system and there's no president. There's no court system. There's no coining money. So there's all of these kind of intrinsic weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation that were really, entrusted to the states. It's a confederation rather than a strong union. So in a sense, we're playing with the other states on the team, but we're not really a unit and a team yet. So Shay's Rebellion is seen as kind of like the flashlight of those weaknesses, really kind of illustrating to America that this wasn't going to work out. We needed a stronger union. And it really is coinciding with the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention of 1787. So it's going to work really well with, the idea that we need a stronger government, at least coming out of Philadelphia. Really, really basic background. Daniel Shay is a revolutionary soldier. He fought valiantly in a couple battles. And when he went back to Western Pennsylvania to return to his life of farming, with lead in his leg, he was owed money and he really was never paid back. You have to remember that all of the debt of the Revolutionary War is on the back of the states that fought it. And Massachusetts, more than any other state, man, they got some debt. They got bad debt. So Daniel Shay, number one, comes back to no paycheck. Number two, he comes back to all these bills, all these tax bills, and all these notices that, you know, he's in debt and he's got to go to court. Really, there's root causes of that too, and it has a lot to do with the demand for hard currency from Europe and trade routes and such. And the merchants that lived in kind of the richer part of Massachusetts, the eastern seaboard, like Boston and such, they're turning over, you know, their need for hard currency to their customers out in western Pennsylvania, and they don't have hard currency. They don't have cash. They would trade with goods and things like, you know, pigs and chickens and stuff like that. And the merchants in Boston, they don't want pigs and chickens. They want they want money. So they start racking up all these bills in western Pennsylvania, and then the courts start taking action. They start, you know, doing bankruptcy and taking people's farms and kicking them out of their homes and yada, yada, yada. And now I start to be a western Pennsylvania farmer, and I'm thinking in my head, didn't Jefferson write about this? Didn't Jefferson say that you have tyranny in your life and you don't really have power over your government and you feel as though you're being taxed without representation and that your voice isn't being heard, that you have a right to do what? Bam, you have a right to revolt. So Shay organizes people like him, other ex-soldiers and people in debt in western Pennsylvania, and they start to use that mob power to shut down courthouses, to stop proceedings, to, you know, stop them from collecting money and declaring bankruptcies. They're taking direct action, and they end up going to the eastern seaboard, to the capital, to demanding that, you know, their livelihood is protected. Thomas Jefferson even wrote a letter, he was ambassador to France at this point, where he said that, you know, the tree of liberty should be replenished with the blood of patriot and tyrants, that it's nature's natural manure. So he likes this concept, but not everybody is like TJ. They're not all anti-feds. You got people that are really worried about the confiscation of power, worried about mob rule, worried about constant revolution. Guys like Sam Adams, you know, Sam Adams beer. Sam Adams kind of facilitated the passage of something called the Riot Act during this. And he basically is going to suspend habeas corpus. He's going to throw these bums in jail without notice, without trial. He was even for the death penalty for these guys. And two of them actually ended up hanging from the nooses. At the end of the day, it's going to be a failure. Shay's rebellion doesn't work out. Shay was finally arrested. He was pardoned later down the road. It's really not about the specificity of the outcome of that event, but more of kind of the illustration of the weaknesses of the articles. This is really a wake-up call. I'm not going to say a wake-up call for most Americans. Most Americans don't care, or most Americans might sympathize with Shay, but it's certainly a wake-up call for those who hold power, those who own land, those merchants and those manufacturers. I didn't mention this before, but the army that crushed Daniel Shay was a private army financed by the merchants because they want to make sure that their bills are going to get paid. At the end of the day, the big lesson, though, is that those ruling class people are going to use this episode to convince Americans that we really need a stronger government. If we don't have a stronger government, we're going to have constant revolt, constant revolution, constant blood in the streets. Babies will be eating babies. It would be bad. So Shay's rebellion illustrates the weakness of the articles and launches the United States into the Constitutional Convention, where we're going to build a stronger constitution and hence a stronger union. So there you go. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it. Shay's rebellion. You shouldn't smoke because it causes bad things to happen to you. All right, guys, where attention goes, energy flows. Pay attention all the time in this world because it's the only weapon that you wield all the time. We'll see you next time. Check out the links.
Very good. I think that historians debate whether the Constitutional Convention would have happened with or without Shays. I think pretty certainly that the wealthy were going to find a way to form a stronger central government to, again, protect their interest, whether it was in land or in people, as in the case of enslaved men, women, and children. Continue to enjoy your history studies, and we'll see you in our next clip together.